There are loves that are forbidden, the kind that family and friends shun, or that defy reason itself.
She fell for him, and all of his charms, the way that he made her feel seen, but once she fell, there was no turning back.
She knew it wasn't right, but, it was still just that fun coupled with him being just handsome that, led her to want to explore the possibilities.
And sometimes the one your heart longs for is also forbidden by law itself.
She was playing a very dicey game here, very risky game. It was, almost like her own real life Bonnie and Clyde.
Those types of individuals sometimes are very charismatic. They know how to talk to people. They know how to figure you out. They know how to manipulate you.
Anytime you cross some of those red flags and the lines get blurred, it gets extremely dangerous.
Chasing that temptation to feed your passion could tear apart the life you've built and take your freedom with it.
A killer's on the loose, and with every minute that passed, the public is more and more at risk.
She had this soft spot for him. It's kind of like how you dip your toe in the water and you keep going until, ultimately you may drown.
June 27th, 2015, Polkton, North Carolina. This small town of just over 2,000 people sits an hour east of Charlotte and 90 miles south of Winston-Salem. Besides the churches, dollar stores, and DMV, one major industry dominates the landscape.
There's about 2 gas stations there. It's a very small rural town. It's not a lot of people.
That's usually a prime location for a correctional facility because it gets the inmates out of that normal hustle and bustle type area.
The Brown Creek Minimum Security Correctional Facility is located in Polkton, and it's their main economic driving force.
Just after midnight, the emergency situation that everyone in a prison community fears shatters the night calm. At 12:34 a.m., the Polkton Police Department gets a call from Brown Creek Correctional that an inmate has escaped from custody. Polkton PD is given a physical description of the escapee and immediately issues a bolo for the inmate to the surrounding area. They're looking for a black male, 6'1", 240 pounds, black hair, brown eyes.
Anytime there's an escape, local law enforcement does have to be notified. Whenever they give us that call that there is an escape, immediately we have to report to the facility and we get in contact with the officer in charge, who at that point becomes the incident commander.
When police arrive at Brown Creek Correctional, they question the officers about the missing prisoner.
How long has he been gone? How far has he gotten? What is going on at this point?
The correctional officers tell police that earlier that evening they were passed a note from an offender informant named Earl, saying to check for inmate Christopher McNeil, a potential escapee. And because of Brown Creek's layout, finding any one prisoner immediately isn't a simple task.
Brown Creek was a medium and minimum facility. The way that those facilities are set up is they have like an open dorm. So you'll have like 28 guys that'll be inside one dorm and they all sleep on bunks. There's a lot more room for them to move around. They don't get restricted to like a single cell.
After being alerted to the possibility of an inmate missing, the officers proceed to do a count.
At least 2 staff members would typically be present and they would call for count time. All residents would then need to stand up beside their beds or their bunk areas, and they would line up and the officers would both go through and count. They would compare their counts, make sure they both had the same, and they would clear the count.
So in the event that the count does not clear, then we would conduct a recount. Now, the officers have to go to each offender, and the offender has to have their ID card and give the officer their ID card, and the officer looks at the ID card, looks at the offender, and verifies that this is the offender that we have. Then that's when the escape procedures start, if we can't find them anywhere in that facility.
And sure enough, the count comes up short, and prison officials tell police they identified that inmate Christopher McNeil is indeed missing.
29-year-old Christopher McNeil is originally from the Winston-Salem part of North Carolina. He started getting in trouble with the law early on. I mean, his record stretches all the way back to juvenile offenses.
By the time he hit his 20s, McNeil had racked up a string of convictions: assaulting a public official, breaking and entering, resisting arrest, carrying a concealed weapon. His run-ins with the law had turned into a full-blown criminal lifestyle.
In 2007, he was charged with first-degree murder, but he managed to avoid a life sentence by taking a plea deal for a lesser charge, second-degree murder.
Mr. McNeil was serving a 14-year sentence for second-degree murder. He also was a career criminal. So this is someone that they were very, very scared about him being loose in the community.
Now, Polkton PD is working to piece together how McNeil managed to escape. Investigators begin questioning the prison staff to determine if there are any cracks in their security systems.
You have to ask yourself, how safe and how closed off is this correctional facility? Are inmates just wandering on and off the campus whenever they feel like it? You know, how secure is it?
Police are given a basic tour so that they can get a sense of where and how this escape may have happened.
A minimum facility like that are also known as prison camps. There's common areas, there's basketball courts, there's gymnasium activities.
Offenders are able to kind of leave their housing unit, go to another housing unit, maybe if they had some friends or hang out with them.
Despite the inmates' freedom, investigators observe that Brown Creek is surrounded by 10-foot fences topped with concertina wire. But they learn those fences aren't as secure as they seem.
Offenders do use things like sheets, pillowcases, blankets. They'll use extra clothing. They'll use anything that they can get their hands on to put on the barbed wire, and that will help them, get over the fence.
McNeil scaled the perimeter fence, used his pillows over the concertina wire to get over that. The pillows were still on the concertina wire during the investigation.
With the how behind McNeil's escape becoming clearer, Polkton detectives are now left wondering why and what prompted his sudden breakout.
Christopher McNeil had only 3 years left in prison. He had already served 11 years out of a 14-year sentence. Why did he escape now? Why risk it?
Sometimes the pressure of prison life gets too heavy. Even with just a few years left, fear, desperation, or a sudden crisis could push someone to run. Polkton detectives wonder, was McNeil scared or something? Was he running from a threat inside? Or was he chasing something on the outside?
The detectives' questions are piling up. Now they turn their attention to Earl, the man who sounded the alarm about McNeil. And what he tells them will take the case in a whole new direction.
The inmate informant Earl drops a bombshell that changes everything. McNeil didn't escape alone.
In June 2015, Polkton police are in the early hours of investigating the escape of inmate Christopher McNeil from Brown Creek Correctional.
McNeil was serving time for second-degree murder, and with only 3 years left on his sentence, had escaped from the minimum security prison.
The COs received a tip from an informant, Earl, confirming McNeil as the escapee. As authorities dug deeper into how he managed to break out, they discovered pillows and sheets hanging on concertina wire around the prison. Investigators have been working to figure out what led to his escape.
To get more answers, Polkton police question the correctional officer who received the note from Earl. He adds a shocking revelation. Earl's note claims McNeil was escaping to meet a female corrections officer, Kendra Miller, on the outside, and that she was helping him. It's a startling accusation.
Now, if the information is true, this changes everything. An officer on the inside helping McNeil escape. That's not just a breach of security. That's a serious violation of the law and everything the job stands for. Now, investigators have to find Kendra Miller to see how involved she really is.
Kendra Miller was 33 years old. By all accounts, she didn't have a bad background. She seemed to be an upstanding citizen.
The center of Kendra's life are her children. She's a single mother of 4. She was very devoted to her kids. The type of mother that goes to every basketball game, very hands-on, very loving. She worked hard to support her children.
She attended community college and decided to take a job at Brown Creek working in the food service department of the facility as a kitchen officer.
Kitchen officers are typically responsible for operating the dining hall functions, just to keep that running efficiently to get everybody that lives there fed. She would be responsible for monitoring and supervising all of these residents working. She was very polite, very kind, always greeted with a smiling face. You know, what you would expect, what you would want to see out of any correctional officer.
While she was working to support her kids, Kendra also had the support from a boyfriend that she had been dating for about a year now. And according to all of her friends and family, she's very, very much in love with him. She seemed like someone living a regular, law-abiding life, just trying to build stability for her family.
While working in the kitchen, Kendra crossed paths with Christopher McNeil. Over time, the two developed a bond.
But now, detectives are following up on the possibility Kendra Miller was involved in Christopher McNeil's escape. They update their BOLO to include Kendra's physical description and the make and model of her car, a 2001 red Ford Mustang.
So at this point, the investigators go to Miller's home to see if she's there or if the escaped prisoner is there as well. When the officers arrive at the home, they don't find Kendra, but they do find about 4 to 5 children. The oldest of those children was around 16 years old, and she was the daughter of Kendra. And they talk to her, and she gives them a cell phone number for her mother.
With Kendra Miller's cell phone number, detectives have their first solid lead.
The officers know that they have to move fast, and they were able to get a warrant and get access to the data information from the cell phone towers.
Once that warrant is gained, they can start pinging the phone. They can see where they went, where they're at.
But the pings are only accurate to a general area. All throughout the night, the Polkton detectives alert the closest law enforcement agents to the latest ping and send them to carefully search the area.
Ultimately, they had about 11 different pings to give them an idea of where the cell phone was moving. Unfortunately, they didn't find the car, they didn't find Mr. McNeil, and they did not find Miss Miller.
With no leads coming in on pursuit of escaped inmate Christopher McNeil, detectives turned back to where this all started, the Brown Creek Correctional Facility, and arranged to interview the informant who had initially given the tip about the escapee, Earl.
The inmate explains to Polkton police that on the night of the escape, CO Kendra Miller was about to put another inmate into the hole as a punishment for having a contraband cell phone. The inmate being punished insisted that Earl exposed that McNeil and Miller had a relationship.
The inmate who was getting put into the hole says he was set up by CO Kendra Miller. He was angry, and so he wanted to get CO Miller in trouble too.
So the inmate said that Mr. McNeil was actually able to leave the facility and come back, and that Mr. McNeil would leave the facility to go engage in sexual acts with Officer Miller.
Earl says that on the evening of the escape, at around 10 p.m., he did in fact see Christopher McNeil leave the dorm without returning.
There are situations where the offenders will just make up something, but in a situation where they allege that there is a relationship between them and a staff member, of course an investigation will be conducted.
It's now 11 a.m., 12 hours since inmate Christopher McNeil escaped from Brown Creek, and there have only been more and more questions overnight and no answers in sight.
Where is Kendra Miller? Did she really run off with McNeil? Did she really abandon her 4 children? Did she really run off with a murderer?
Is Kendra Miller with McNeil under duress? Did inmate McNeil make CO Kendra Miller help him with threats? Is she safe? Is she still alive?
Then, just after 11 a.m. that morning, a shocking development changes everything. The Polkton officers learn that Kendra Miller has made contact with her Brown Creek superiors.
Kendra Miller called and said she's willing to come in and be questioned voluntarily at noon.
Detectives are surprised by Kendra's unexpected call, but determined to uncover the truth about her role in Christopher McNeil's escape.
As they prepare to question her, they wonder what she will reveal. Why did she get involved with an inmate? Did he threaten or abuse her? Did she really help him escape?
If Kendra Miller really did help McNeil, does she know where this dangerous killer is now?
We're always supposed to maintain a professional relationship with the offenders that we supervise, that are under our care. So in the event that it's found out that you start to have that unprofessional, maybe romantic relationship, it's actually a Class E felony charge. That's why we try to educate them as much as possible about the effects and what can happen and how you can be charged if you do, engage in that type of relationship with someone who you are supposed to be the custodial person over.
Inmates at Brown Creek Correctional Facility claim that CO Kendra Miller helped Christopher McNeil escape from the prison because the two were having a sexual affair. And now, about 12 hours after inmate McNeil has gone missing without a trace, Corrections Officer Kendra Miller is coming in voluntarily to be questioned.
Investigators had attempted to track Kendra using cell phone data, but were unable to pinpoint her location or find her vehicle. So when she finally decided to come in and speak to the police, it was a crucial break in the case.
So in this moment, she's just being, interrogated. She is still under her own volition to leave at any moment.
When detectives asked about her whereabouts during the time of McNeil's escape, Kendra Miller insists she was nowhere near the prison at the time of escape.
Kendra Miller says she drove her car to her boyfriend Antoine Shaw's house between 1:30 and 2 a.m. and then went to sleep. She says while she was there, her daughter called on her cell phone and told her that the police were looking for her and that Kendra should call the police.
Kendra is willing to verify to police that her cell phone number is the same one that her daughter had given them, and that they tracked through the night.
The minutes are ticking by, and there's a convicted felon out on the loose. Police push Kendra harder about if she helped him and where he is now.
Kendra Miller sticks to her story and insists that she has no romantic or sexual relationship with McNeil. She says that the other inmates are just lying about her to try to get her in trouble.
She essentially gets to the point where she says she doesn't want to answer any questions, and she shuts it down.
Detectives aren't buying her story. They think that she's just there answering questions to save face, to tell them what they want.
They didn't have enough information. All they had was the word of a prison informant. They didn't have any direct evidence. They technically didn't even have any circumstantial evidence. So at this point, they decided to let her go and continue their investigation.
During the time Polkton police have been interviewing CO Miller, Brown Creek officials have been doing their own internal investigations about the night of the escape.
There was a jailhouse recording of an inmate calling Kendra Miller's phone. And in that phone call, they could hear a female answer the phone and Mr. McNeil then speaking to the inmate. And the inmate was telling him that there were officers that were walking outside and that the block was hot and he needed to get back.
For detectives, this is solid evidence linking Kendra Miller and inmate Christopher McNeil. McNeil was reached at Kendra Miller's cell number after the escape.
The general knowledge was that they were in a relationship. Once we receive a report that a staff member may be fraternizing with an offender, and then an investigation will begin at that point.
Getting involved with an inmate is the most basic line a corrections officer should never cross.
It's not uncommon when you have individuals that are career criminals. Those types of individuals sometimes are very charismatic. They know how to talk to people. They know how to figure you out. They know how to manipulate you. So I am imagining that that's exactly what Mr. McNeil did.
As a woman, you're around these men day in and day out. And so you see them, in different scenarios where they're, working hard, possibly sweating. He was a very attractive inmate. At the end of the day, I think she knew, I know she knew it wasn't right, but, you know, it was still just that fun coupled with him being just handsome that, you know, led her to want to explore the possibilities, and that's what she did.
Some people, they may really thrive off of the intimacy. Maybe that is what drives them. Maybe while they're, you know, out in their daily life, they don't receive any intimacy. There's no one that comes up to them and tells them that they're beautiful and tells them, you know, that they would like to spend time with them or be in a relationship with them. But at the end of the day, the offender, they're really just trying to help themselves.
Miss Miller just seemed like a woman who wanted love. You know, although she had a boyfriend at the time, maybe things weren't that great at home. I think Mr. McNeil played in on that. He could see that maybe there was something missing at home, and he figured out a way as a man with a tough guy, you know, kind of act to soften her and make her feel as though he could ultimately be her protector, but also that he wasn't this bad guy.
With no clear answers from their interrogation of Kendra Miller, detectives instead work on a theory of how she and McNeil devised a plan to spend more time together outside the prison.
Somebody on the inside had to give Mr. McNeil, I guess, the layout, so to say. And it's evident that Miller was the one who did it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have known how to just get around the facility so easily.
The detectives' theory leaves them with another pressing question.
Kendra Miller needed to ignore what landed him in Brown Creek Prison in the first place. He was a killer, tried and convicted.
A lot of women will overlook certain things for what seems like love or lust. Sometimes it's easy to convince yourself that risk is worth the reward, especially when the connection feels intense. But for Kendra, was it really worth it?
The day after Christopher McNeil's prison break from Brown Creek Correctional Facility, detectives are investigating rumors that CO Kendra Miller may have had an intimate relationship with the inmate, and that she helped him escape. But the path leading to this wild escape first started with a murder years before.
To really understand what happened with Christopher McNeil, investigators need to look back at what led to his current prison sentence.
On March 15, 2007, police discovered the body of 44-year-old Bobby Moore alongside a creek in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He'd been shot to death.
And when police look up Mr. Muir, they find out that he was actually awaiting trial on cocaine trafficking charges.
So that immediately suggested police that there's a highly likelihood that Bobby Muir's criminal activities had brought him into contact with violent people or violent situations.
Detectives questioned the victim's family. Bobby Muir's girlfriend, Debbie Lewis, tells investigators the last time she saw Bobby alive was at her apartment the morning he was killed, and that Bobby was there with another man, Christopher McNeil. She said that they left together around 6:30 a.m. in McNeil's car.
Police tracked down Christopher McNeil and searched the car he was driving the day of the murder. Despite being cleaned, they find a blood sample that matches victim Bobby Muir. Though the murder weapon isn't found, the blood evidence leads detectives to charge McNeil with first-degree murder.
The blood shows Muir was transported after being shot, suggesting a very premeditated act. Christopher McNeil is very calculating, very cold, very much in control, and strategic.
Detectives believe that while serving his time, Christopher McNeil presented a more sensitive side to Kendra, and she connected with that. He wanted her to see that warmth, and she was attracted to him. And she wanted to get swept up in that, even though she knew exactly what he had done to wind up in prison.
Bobby Muir left behind a longtime girlfriend, parents, siblings, a niece, a whole family that loved him and mourned him. Kendra Miller had to willfully push all of that sadness out of her mind to be able to have a fun romance with Christopher McNeil.
Detectives now have a clearer picture of how Christopher McNeil landed in prison for 14 years and are trying to piece together how Kendra Miller fell for his charms.
It was, you know, breaking up that monotony of her boring Polkton life, and I think she got caught up. It was something that was fun. It was, you know, this almost like her own real life Bonnie and Clyde, the good girl, the bad guy. And I think she just got in too deep and didn't know how to get herself out of it.
Investigators' concerns about finding the convicted killer grow with each passing minute. The search becomes more urgent, and they fear finding him will only get more difficult. In hopes of breaking the case, they decide to revisit Kendra Miller.
Investigators feel that there's just too much information connecting Kendra to McNeil's escape. So they set out to question her again, but this time, she's nowhere to be found.
Detectives now strongly suspect CO Kendra Miller helped inmate Christopher McNeil escape from prison. But they have no idea where she is after her voluntary interview ended late in the afternoon of June 27th, the same day of the escape.
Detectives have traced calls from the prison to Kendra's phone, gathered accounts from inmates, including an informant, and spoken to other correctional officers. Everything in their investigation keeps pointing back to Kendra Miller.
The police department, the detectives had enough information, enough evidence to say, like, yes, at this moment, we have enough probable cause to believe that she, in fact, committed these crimes. And so that warranted them the right to arrest her at that moment.
Polkton police go to Kendra Miller's primary residence, but are unable to locate her there.
The officers were able to find out that Miss Miller had a boyfriend, and when they called him, they asked if he knew where her whereabouts were. And he said he didn't know where she was and that she wasn't with him.
Officers show up to his home. His father answers the door, and officers ask, we're looking for Officer Miller. Have you seen her? And I'm assuming the father was, unaware of what was happening in that moment, and he totally says, yeah, she's back in my son's room. And so the father leads them to the son's room, and there Miss Miller is laying across the bed.
Police arrest Kendra Miller and charge her with felony aiding and abetting a fugitive, harboring a fugitive, and having sex with an inmate.
It appeared that she had taken some medication and drank some alcohol, so they did transport her to the local hospital. Once she is looked at and cleared by the doctors, she arrives at the Town Hall Police Department.
But Kendra Miller refuses to help law enforcement any further to recapture her lover, Christopher McNeil.
There's a huge amount of pressure here for detectives. Kendra Miller might know where Christopher McNeil is right now. She might have given him money and know exactly where he's going next. But she's not talking, and the public is still at risk. Christopher McNeil is a convicted murderer, and he's still out there. Police have to do everything they can to track this escaped killer down.
Police look into Christopher McNeil's background and determine he may have family about 2 hours north of the Brown Creek prison.
The officers believe that he had family members that were in the Winston-Salem area.
Public safety is always the #1 concern. And how can you warn the public or let people know who you're looking for?
Detectives notify local media and law enforcement in Winston-Salem to set up a watch for McNeil.
Mr. McNeil's face is all over the news channels. His rap sheet is being, plastered everywhere. This causes people around that Winston-Salem area to be on the lookout.
The investigating officers were receiving reports that there were sightings of Mr. McNeil in the Winston-Salem area.
Police get a call that there's a confirmed McNeil sighting on Timlick Avenue in Winston-Salem. This is the closest they've been to capturing the inmate since the escape.
We'll meet up with whoever the person is that reported this sighting, and then we'll try to figure out more information. What did this person look like? What did their demeanor look like?
Police bring in scent dogs to try to pick up McNeil's trail from Timlick Avenue. But there's no luck.
He had family members there as well. They were doing somewhat of a stakeout of the family members' residence.
Detectives begin monitoring Kendra's phone calls while she's in custody and intercept a call that reveals that a female relative of McNeil's and another female friend have been helping him in Winston-Salem. The women are both charged with harboring a fugitive.
With these two women in question, they didn't want to incriminate themselves. Although they had already been helping Mr. McNeil get about town at that moment, they wanted to make sure that they wouldn't get in any deeper trouble. And so they said, hey, you know, we think he's here. Maybe check this location, this address.
Frustratingly, the female relative's tip doesn't lead to McNeil. The next steps in the investigation actually come from Good Samaritan sightings of Christopher McNeil heading north along the highway.
Law enforcement was on the trail of this guy. They were receiving reports that he had been seen in Forsyth County, and they also received reports that he was seen getting on the back of a motorcycle and then going on Highway 52.
Late that night, all the patience and groundwork laid by investigators pays off. At about 11 p.m. on Sunday, June 28th, passers-by notice a man fitting Christopher McNeil's description walking north along Highway 52 near the Davidson-Forsyth County line.
Anytime that we apprehend an offender, you never know what's going to happen. Once you see the offender and you're going towards them, you don't know what they're going to do because obviously their back is against the wall. They could attempt to do anything. You don't know whether they're armed.
Your main thought and focus is to get this person back into custody without struggle, without having to, use physical force against the person on the run. These officers are just trying to ultimately get the job done, get him back in custody, get him back to a facility, and, ultimately make the public feel safer again.
The police approached him and they took him back into custody without incident.
In just under 2 days, Christopher McNeil's wild prison escape has come to an end. But so many questions remain.
Investigators still don't know how was this convicted killer was able to lure a loving mother of four, a member of the Thin Blue Line herself, onto a path of lawlessness and mayhem. She had everything to lose over just one man.
Miss Miller was held to a higher standard. As an officer within the Corrections Department of North Carolina, there were rules and boundaries that she had to set. Mr. McNeil, he saw that unfortunately Miss Miller had this soft spot for him. It was just to a point where he kept testing her, staying over for shifts, saying all the right things, as a man may say to a woman who may have been lonely at the time. And so it just turned into something where it sounds like she let her guard down.
Devoted mother of four and corrections officer Kendra Miller allegedly helped her inmate lover walk away from prison. But now convicted killer Christopher McNeil has finally been apprehended.
Once the investigative officers were able to get in front of Mr. McNeil, he actually implicated Kendra and said that she helped him to get out of the prison.
Though he did have this ongoing, relationship with Officer Miller, that wasn't his that wasn't his focus at that moment. He was thinking about self. He had to, rat her out and let them know that this wasn't all me. Had it not been for her giving me the access throughout the facility, mapping out a plan for me to, basically escape, whenever we met up, I would not be in this position. And so I feel like that was his motive. If I rat her out, maybe it'll lessen the blow for me. And hopefully, my sentence or my consequences won't be as great.
Christopher McNeil gives a statement to detectives that helps them piece together what happened on the night of June 27th.
He had this routine carved out, maybe they mapped it out together, where he went from point A to point B, ultimately to get outside of the prison wall and meet up with Miller.
McNeil explains how he and Kendra Miller would usually meet. He would walk through the dorm, then scale the chain link fence using his sheets and pillow to protect himself from the concertina wire. Officer Kendra Miller would park her red Mustang outside the fence, and they would have their intimate time in the car.
McNeil told investigators that after their rendezvous, he would then do the process in reverse and return himself to the prison.
When you're doing something and you're saying, oh, I'm getting away with this, you keep pushing that boundary. And so I think that's this case. And so once they started doing it, it became routine. This is something that just became second nature. He was no longer thinking about the consequences. Obviously no longer was Officer Miller, and they just kept going with it.
On the night of the escape, Officer Miller parked outside the prison fence and Christopher McNeil met her just like usual.
The other part of the system they had in place was that McNeil gave an inmate friend Officer Miller's cell phone number to warn them about any problems that might come up while McNeil was on the outside.
Then around midnight, the night of the escape, the informant, inmate Earl, passed a note to Brown Creek officers saying inmate McNeil was missing, which ultimately derailed the date between Kendra Miller and Christopher McNeil while McNeil was still outside.
In a strange kind of irony, Kendra Miller was partially telling the truth. The inmates who informed on her were trying to get her in trouble as a retaliation for putting one of them in the hole. They were just telling a true story to do it.
Investigators got more details on the phone call made to McNeil after the count that night didn't clear and the alarm was raised.
Once the facility itself had gone onto lockdown, or they implemented this, search, so to say, for the missing inmate, which was Mr. McNeil, the inmate decided to call and warn his friend that ultimately his way to get back in would probably not work. They had this understanding, and so he was upholding his end of the agreement by warning Mr. McNeil.
That's when CO Kendra Miller and inmate Christopher McNeil understood Christopher would be spotted climbing the fence if he tried to go back inside, and they'd both be in trouble. McNeil was trapped on the outside of the prison.
Ultimately, he was not trying to escape. His intention was to visit a woman and come back in undetected. In the time that the confidential informant passed the note, the count happened, they go into the procedures, the police come, all the things happen, they get scared and decide to flee instead of returning.
I think in that moment he just panicked. Because now the prison is on lockdown due to a missing inmate, he can't do that. And so I think in that moment it was kind of flight or fight.
Though Kendra Miller won't admit to it, police believe she drove Christopher Miller up to Winston-Salem, where he had family contacts.
If I'm going to run, at least get me as close to my family as possible. I know they're gonna have my back. They're probably gonna be willing to let me stay or hide out, and they're probably gonna be more than likely willing to lie on my behalf to keep me safe, to keep me free.
But once Christopher McNeil was up in Winston-Salem, he had no idea what to do next. There was no escape plan, so he was soon apprehended by law enforcement.
It's easy to understand why Christopher McNeil will want freedom from prison. And the question on everyone's mind is why Kendra Miller would get involved with this man or help him get outside the fence.
Why risk losing your job? Why risk being put in jail? Your kids possibly being taken away?
She was so caught up in the situation with him that she decided to, go along with these plans and then assist him in these plans. And it just shows how deep these type of relationships can get.
After the drama of the Brown Creek prison escape, the legal system handed out moderate sentences and restored order to the area.
Mr. McNeil received an additional 23 months added to his sentence, and Ms. Miller pled guilty to obstruction of justice and received 6 months of probation. She also lost her job.
You have to look at what good will it do? What is justice in this situation for this person in this setting? And ultimately, I think that reducing those charges and her taking her plea was probably the best thing for everybody involved. This way, she still got to take care of her children, and then the public and justice in general still got something, a guilty verdict. I think it was a fair outcome. And I hate that that happened, and I hope she's okay now.
To the residents of Polkton, Kendra Miller may have crossed just about every boundary possible as a corrections officer. But she also didn't have the help of strong guardrails to help keep her on a safe path.
Kendra didn't really have anyone to steer her away from this, to tell her to slow down or take a step back and really see the danger of getting involved with McNeil. So she followed her heart and risked everything for her man.
Ultimately, this situation does not make Miss Miller a bad person. It made her a vulnerable person who fell victim to somebody's manipulation. And possibly had she had things that are available now.
The silence of a suburban attic is usually reserved for forgotten holiday decorations and the dust of decades, but for one family in a quiet, unassuming town, it became the final resting place of a secret that had been screaming to be heard for 30 long, agonizing years. Imagine walking into a space you've known your entire life, only to find a hidden compartment tucked behind the insulation, containing items that didn't belong to you, items that carried the stench of a decades-old nightmare. This is not a thriller movie. This is the reality of a cold case that defied the best efforts of law enforcement until a simple renovation uncovered the evidence that the killer thought had been purged by time itself. The air in the house still feels different, charged with the residual energy of a tragedy that was never supposed to be solved, a violent disruption of normalcy that left an entire community questioning everything they knew about the people living next door. When the police arrived, they weren't expecting to exhume a ghost, but as they laid out the contents of that attic, the blood-stained garments, the personal effects of a girl who had vanished without a trace in the late 90s, and a journal that read like the confession of a man consumed by his own depravity, the pieces of a broken puzzle began to snap into place with a sickening, definitive click. The victim, a bright, ambitious high school student, had been ripped from her life on an ordinary Tuesday, leaving behind only the haunting image of her bicycle leaning against a park fence, as if she were about to return at any moment. For 3 decades, the town lived in the shadow of this disappearance, a collective trauma that seeped into the soil and the souls of those who walked these streets, never knowing that the answer was resting just a few feet above their heads. The crime scene itself, reconstructed from the decades-old files and the chilling new evidence discovered in the crawlspace, paints a picture of a calculated, predatory strike that was as swift as it was brutal. We are talking about an era before the ubiquitous presence of modern surveillance, a time when a person could simply slip through the cracks of reality and vanish into the ether of the American landscape. The victim's family had been forced to endure the agonizing, slow-motion decay of hope, watching the seasons change and the years pile up, all while the primary suspect, a man who had successfully blended into the background of their daily lives, walked free, perhaps even offering them comfort as they grieved. The arrogance of a killer is what makes the stomach turn. He thought he was smarter than the system. He thought he had buried his sins where no one would ever look, but fate has a cruel way of surfacing when the clock runs out. The discovery in the attic wasn't just a lucky break. It was a cosmic correction, a sign that no matter how deep the burial, the truth has a way of breathing again. As the forensic team processed the evidence under the glaring, sterile lights of a lab, they were not just cataloging physical objects, they were reconstructing the final moments of a life stolen, documenting the physical manifestations of a cruelty that is difficult for the human heart to comprehend. The investigation that followed this discovery was a masterclass in modern forensic diligence, a race against time to bridge the gap between the physical evidence in the attic and the cold, hard reality of the judicial process. Detectives worked with a feverish intensity, knowing that the statute of limitations for their own professional failure had long since passed, and this was their chance to deliver justice to a family that had forgotten what it felt like to believe in it. They started with the journal, a small, nondescript notebook that contained the internal monologue of a man who viewed himself as a god over the lives he decided to terminate. The handwriting, trembling and frantic in some entries, arrogant and cold in others, provided the roadmap they had been missing since 1994. Every page was a testament to the isolation and the perversion that had been allowed to fester in the dark corners of the suburb, a reminder that the most dangerous monsters are often the ones who know how to smile and shake hands at the local grocery store. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? That for 30 years, the person responsible for such a heinous act might have been living a quiet, unremarkable existence just a few streets away, perhaps even watching the memorial vigils from his own living room window. But how does a secret like this stay hidden for 3 decades? That is the question that haunts the townspeople as they try to process the news. They are re-examining their own memories, looking for the cracks in the masks of their neighbors, trying to identify the moment when they might have looked away or dismissed a warning sign that, in hindsight, feels like a neon sign in the dark. The investigation revealed a network of complacency, a system that was under-resourced and overstretched, leading to a series of missteps that allowed the killer to remain undetected for so long. It's a painful realization for the detectives who were on the original case, many of whom have since retired, carrying the weight of this unsolved mystery like a stone in their shoe. They are being brought back into the fold, forced to account for the gaps in their early work, and the tension in the department is palpable, a mixture of professional shame and the desperate, burning need for a successful resolution. As the suspect was finally brought in for questioning, the atmosphere in the precinct was thick with the weight of decades of unresolved rage. He was an older man now, frail and gray, a far cry from the lethal figure he had been 30 years ago, but the eyes remained the same, cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of the empathy that most of us take for granted. He didn't offer a dramatic confession. Instead, he offered a chilling, matter-of-fact breakdown of the events, describing the abduction as if he were recounting a casual, everyday errand. The lack of remorse was the most shocking element, a testament to the moral vacuum that had allowed him to function in society while harboring the knowledge of such a horrific act. The detectives sat there, listening to the words pour out, their own hands itching to break protocol, but they remained stone-faced, documenting the truth with the detached precision required to send a man to prison for the rest of his natural life. The trial itself was a theater of the grotesque, a public reckoning that demanded the community stare directly into the face of their own collective history. Every detail presented in court was a new layer of heartbreak, from the forensic reconstruction of the final struggle to the heartbreaking, shaky testimonies of the victim's siblings, who had spent their entire adult lives mourning a sister they barely had the chance to know. The defense tried to paint a picture of a man who had changed, a man who had led a quiet, law-abiding life for the last 30 years, but the evidence in the attic was an unyielding argument against the possibility of redemption. It was a clear, unambiguous narrative of a predator who had paused his violence, not because he found a conscience, but because he found the perfect conditions to remain invisible. The impact of this case on the town cannot be overstated. It is a permanent mark on their identity, a reminder that the veneer of safety can be stripped away in an instant. Parents are watching their children with a different kind of vigilance, not the kind that comes from paranoia, but the kind that comes from the sudden, jarring understanding of what is possible. The schools have implemented new, more rigorous safety protocols, and the neighborhood watches have been revitalized, with people finally taking the time to truly know who they are living next to. It's a sad, necessary evolution, a maturation of a community that was forced to grow up overnight, shedding the naivety that had defined them for so long. The tragedy is that it took 30 years and a discovery in a dusty, forgotten crawlspace to reach this point of consciousness. Yet, amidst the anger and the trauma, there is a flicker of something resembling closure. For the family, the conviction is the end of a long, dark tunnel, the validation of the gut feeling they had held onto for decades even when the world told them to move on. They're finally able to lay their sister to rest, to hold a proper service, and to begin the process of grieving in a world that finally acknowledges the truth of what happened to her. The weight of the secret has been lifted, and while it doesn't bring her back, it removes the agonizing question mark that had been the center of their existence. The community is surrounding them, not just with sympathy, but with a shared sense of relief, as if the entire town has been holding its breath for 30 years and is finally allowed to exhale. But the ghost of this case will never truly leave. The house where the evidence was found has become a somber landmark, a place that people avoid, a permanent reminder of the violence that once simmered within its walls. There are plans to tear it down, to scrub the memory of the suspect from the landscape, but the psychological scars are deeper. The investigation has sparked a nationwide conversation about the limitations of our criminal justice system, the importance of reinvestigating cold cases, and the reality that justice is often a race that spans generations. We are seeing a new wave of interest in forensic technology, a realization that the past is not truly dead, and that with the right tools and the right persistence, we can shine a light into even the darkest corners. The The ending of this case is not a happy one, for there is no such thing as a happy ending when a life is stolen and decades are lost, but it is a necessary one. It is a story about the stubborn, unyielding nature of truth, about the way the past eventually catches up to the present, and about the humanity that persists even when faced with the most inhuman of acts. It is a reminder that we are all responsible for one another, and that silence, while comfortable, is the most dangerous environment of all. As the town prepares to move forward, to turn the page on this final, tragic chapter, they do so with a newfound, steely resolve to ensure that nothing like this is ever allowed to happen again in their midst, holding on to the hard-won peace that comes only when the truth is finally brought into the light. The final verdict, the slamming of the prison cell door, and the return of the victim's belongings to her family, these are the small, measured victories that define the conclusion of this odyssey. The detectives, the family, the town, they are all left to grapple with the realization that justice is often a long, agonizingly slow process, and that the only thing more powerful than a secret is the truth that refuses to be suppressed. They are walking away from this experience fundamentally altered, their perspectives on trust, community, and the nature of evil permanently rewritten, and as the dust settles, they are left with the cold, hard comfort that for the first time in 30 years, they are finally seeing the world as it truly is. The investigation may be over, but the echo of this case will continue to resonate, a permanent warning to those who think they can hide, and a promise to those who are still waiting for their own justice to arrive. The forensic team, now operating within the sterile, hushed confines of the State Crime Laboratory, moved with a solemn, ritualistic precision that the original investigators in 1994 could never have imagined. They understood that the items pulled from that suburban attic were not merely objects. They were radioactive remnants of a life brutally truncated, artifacts that held the chemical signature of a predator who had effectively been erased by the passage of time. Each piece of evidence, the torn, yellowing sweater, the small, rusted locket, and the singular, stained diary, was handled with the reverence reserved for holy relics. The diary, in particular, was the focal point of the investigation. Its pages, brittle and susceptible to the slightest touch, contained a chilling, stream of consciousness account of the abduction and subsequent months of obsessive observation. The suspect had documented his proximity to the victim's family, his presence at the local grocery store, and his terrifying ability to inhabit the periphery of their grief while remaining undetected. To the investigators, reading these entries was like walking through the mind of a ghost who had decided to manifest in the tangible world. As the forensic experts applied advanced mass spectrometry and DNA sequencing to the garments, they were looking for more than just blood. They were looking for the fleeting, microscopic traces of skin cells, hair follicles, and environmental markers that would solidify the suspect's presence at the scene of the disappearance. The modern lab was a world of blinding light and hum of machinery, a stark contrast to the dark, claustrophobic attic where this evidence had languished for 3 decades. The scientists were working against the degradation of time, knowing that the environment of the crawlspace, the fluctuations in temperature and the humidity, had likely compromised much of the biological material. Yet the results that emerged slowly bit by bit were nothing short of miraculous. The genetic marker, isolated from a small, dried smear on the collar of the victim's clothing, was a clean, high-probability match. It was the moment the room went silent. The lead investigator, a veteran of 20 years who had seen the worst of human behavior, simply set his tablet down, walked to the window, and stared out at the parking lot, the weight of the moment pressing down on his chest. They had the killer. The logistical nightmare of the subsequent arrest was orchestrated in the shadow of complete, absolute silence. Thorne knew that the suspect, now a man in his late 60s living in a neighboring county, was a creature of habit. He worked as a part-time librarian, a role that had provided him with a respectable, low-profile existence. He was a man who had seemingly evolved, a man who had replaced the violence of his youth with the quiet, intellectual pursuits of his middle age. The contradiction was jarring. How does one reconcile the act of taking a young woman's life with the daily, methodical curation of books? The detectives spent days watching him from an unmarked surveillance van, witnessing the mundane cycles of his life, the trips to the bank, the evening meals at a local diner, the way he would pause on the sidewalk to feed the local pigeons. It was a life of such aggressive, studied normalcy that it felt like an insult to the victim. The investigators had to suppress the urge to storm the library and confront him, to demand an explanation for the decades of silence, to scream at the sky for the sheer injustice of his comfort. The arrest itself happened on a humid Thursday morning, the kind of day where the sky hangs low and heavy with the threat of an impending storm. Thorne and his team moved with the precision of a shadow, intercepting the suspect as he arrived at the library doors. There were no sirens, no flashing lights, and no dramatic showdowns. Just the sharp, clinical sound of handcuffs clicking into place. The suspect's reaction was not one of panic or sudden, sharp denial. It was a profound, weary resignation. He looked at Thorne, not with the eyes of a monster, but with the eyes of a man who had spent 30 years waiting for the inevitable. He didn't ask what was happening. He didn't protest his innocence. He simply sighed, a sound that carried the crushing, final weight of a secret that had been kept too long. It was the sound of a story reaching its end, a sound that signaled the final, necessary death of his carefully constructed life of lies. The precinct interrogation was a grueling, marathon session that pushed the boundaries of emotional endurance for everyone involved. The suspect, under the pressure of the evidence, the physical items from the attic and the unassailable DNA, began to speak, not in a rush, but in a measured, agonizingly slow cadence. He spoke of the day of the abduction as if it were a vivid, indelible scene from a film that he had been forced to watch repeatedly for decades. He confessed to the stalking, the meticulous planning, and the way he had managed to hide the evidence in his own home, knowing that the police would never think to look in the one place that was off-limits to them. His arrogance was still there, a thin, pathetic veil of superiority that he tried to drape over his confession, but it couldn't hide the rot. He explained how he had continued to live in the town for 5 years after the crime, how he had attended town meetings and even donated to the memorial fund that had been set up in the victim's name. This revelation left the detectives in the room speechless, their rage barely contained behind their professional masks. The victim's family, upon being notified that the case had been resolved, did not experience the immediate, cathartic release they had imagined for decades. Instead, they were plunged into a state of profound, disorienting grief. The resolution brought the facts to the surface, but it couldn't bring the person back. The reality of the girl's end, the brutality of the abduction, and the terror of her final moments was a trauma that was now laid bare, no longer obscured by the protective, hazy fog of the unknown. They had to learn how to exist in a world where the answer was no longer a dream, but a hard, brutal fact. The detectives sat with them, offering what little comfort they could, but they knew that justice, while a necessary component of closure, is not a medicine for the soul. They were witnessing the transformation of a 30-year-old mystery into a 30-year-old tragedy, a transition that was as painful as it was essential. In the days that followed, the town began to react, a slow, rippling wave of shock and indignation that quickly turned into a public reckoning. People who had known the suspect, people who had worked with him, and people who had seen him at the park began to question their own memories. They looked for the signs, the subtle, missed indicators that a predator had been living in their midst. The community's sense of safety was replaced by a cold, nagging suspicion, an invasive doubt that seeped into the way they treated their neighbors, their friends, and even their families. The killer had done more than just steal a life. He had eroded the foundation of trust that held their society together. This, the detectives realized, was the true, lasting damage of a cold case. It isn't just about the crime, but about the slow, poisonous way the silence eats away at the heart of the people left behind. The legal proceedings moved forward with an efficiency that was almost startling, a sharp departure from the lethargic, stalling processes of the past. The prosecutor, a woman with a reputation for a steely, unbending commitment to the truth, laid out the case in a series of pretrial motions that effectively neutralized the suspect's defense before the trial even began. She presented the evidence from the attic as a physical, undeniable record of intent, and the journal as the definitive, damning account of the crime. The suspect's defense team, tasked with the near-impossible goal of mitigating the damage, could only watch as their client's curated life was dismantled piece by piece under the glare of the courtroom lights. Every item from that dusty, forgotten attic was introduced as a silent, powerful witness, each one a fragment of the victim's life that the killer had hoarded like a trophy. As the trial dates were set, the town of Oakwood braced itself for the final, necessary act of this long, dark performance. The media arrived in force, turning the suburban streets into a spectacle, the cameras capturing the faces of people who had once walked these same streets in the ignorance of the 90s. It was a strange, surreal experience for the residents to see their own history being dissected and debated by strangers on television screens. They were forced to watch as their own failure, their own inability to see the danger, was cataloged and analyzed by experts from around the world. It was a humbling, humiliating process, but it was one that they had to endure in order to move forward. They were finally, forcefully, confronting the reality of their own past, and in doing so, they were taking the first, tentative steps toward reclaiming their future. The detective, in the quiet moments between the legal filings and the witness preparation, would often go to the site of the now-demolished house where the evidence had been found. It was a vacant, unremarkable lot, overgrown with weeds and the persistent, unyielding scrub of the Florida landscape. He would stand there, feeling the weight of the years, thinking about the girl who had vanished and the monster who had hidden in the plain, mundane sight. He realized that the case had not just been a professional challenge, it had been a profound, life-altering, and, in many ways, soul-destroying encounter with the reality of human evil. He had seen the way the silence could be used to protect a killer, and he had seen the way the truth, when it finally emerged, could be both a cure and a poison. He was ready for the trial to end, ready for the gavel to strike, and ready to walk away from this case, knowing that he had done his part to ensure that justice was served, even if it had come decades too late. The courtroom became the center of the world for everyone involved, a space where the past was being reconstructed in real time, its fragments and jagged edges polished and sharpened into a coherent, undeniable narrative. The jury, a group of people who had been selected with the extreme, meticulous care required for such a high-profile case, listened to the evidence with a gravity that was almost terrifying to witness. They were the arbiters of the town's history, the ones who would decide what the final, lasting impact of this tragedy would be. Every time an object from the attic was shown to them, the tension in the room rose, a palpable, electric surge of collective recognition. It was as if they were seeing the crime occur before their very eyes, as if the attic itself had been moved, piece by piece, into the center of the room. The emotional climax of the trial came when the victim's mother took the stand. She was a woman who had lived in the prison of her own daughter's disappearance for 30 years, a person whose entire life had been defined by the absence of an answer. When she spoke, her voice was not the shaky, fragile instrument of a grieving victim, but a strong, clear, and unyielding declaration of truth. She didn't look at the suspect. She looked at the jury, and she told them of the life that had been lost, of the dreams that had been burned, and of the long, agonizing struggle to maintain the memory of a child who was becoming a ghost. Her words were a scalpel, cutting through the legal maneuvers, the forensic jargon, and the intellectual detachment of the courtroom, exposing the heart of the matter for everyone to see. It was the moment that the town finally, collectively, understood what had been stolen. In the final, grueling days of the trial, the defense mounted a pathetic, last-ditch effort to claim that the suspect had been suffering from a transient state of mental incapacity, a desperate attempt to avoid the consequences of his actions. The prosecution, led by the unflinching, brilliant prosecutor, destroyed this narrative with a surgical, devastating, and absolute precision. They used the journal, the evidence in the attic, and the suspect's own, self-serving words to prove that he had always been in control, that he had always known the value of the life he was destroying, and that his life of normalcy had been a choice, a calculated, cynical, and deliberate masquerade. The jury's deliberation was short, a swift, decisive, and final affirmation of the truth that had been buried in that dusty, crawl space for 3 decades. The verdict, when it was finally delivered, was a moment of profound, echoing silence, the word guilty resonating through the courtroom like a bell tolling for the end of a long, dark era. There was no eruption of joy, no celebration, only a shared, profound, and deeply human realization that the nightmare had finally, truly, and completely come to an end. The suspect, now an old, forgotten man, was led away, his face a hollow, empty mask of the predator he had once been. He had lost not just the case, but the entire, constructed reality of his own existence, his life stripped away by the very truth he had spent 3 decades trying to bury. The file was closed, the records were finalized, and the story of the Florida 1988 disappearance was, finally, at rest. As the team walked out of the courthouse, the afternoon sun feeling sharper and more intense than ever, Thorne looked at the sky and felt the long, heavy burden of the case finally lift. He had fulfilled his duty, he had honored the victim's memory, and he had helped to restore a measure of sanity to a community that had lived with an open, festering wound for an entire generation. He knew that the world would continue to spin, that other mysteries would emerge, and that the shadows would continue to play their tricks in the lives of the people, but for now, for this day, for this case, there was only the cold, hard, and deeply resonant clarity of the truth. He felt a profound, quiet gratitude for the work, the persistence, and the collective, human effort that had made it possible. The attic had finally, yielded its secret, and in doing so, it had saved them all. He was ready for the quiet, ready for the rest, and ready to walk away from the darkness, knowing that the light had, at long last, claimed its due. The discovery of the attic evidence wasn't just a breakthrough, it was an atmospheric shift. For the detectives, every object recovered from that crawlspace felt like a live wire, carrying the lethal charge of a 30-year-old trauma that had remained dangerously dormant. They approached the cataloging process with a surgical intensity, knowing that every fiber, every fingerprint, and every smudge on the journal's pages represented a potential bridge to the final, necessary piece of this puzzle. The house itself, the place where a man had lived, slept, and raised a family while hiding the spoils of a monster, now felt like a crime scene that spanned 3 decades. Thorne stood in the center of the living room, looking at the pristine furniture and the neatly framed family photos, trying to reconcile the suburban normalcy with the horror that had been breathing in the attic right above their heads. This was the true, chilling nature of the suspect, a man who possessed the capacity for a dual existence so profound that he could commit a murder and then, minutes later, step into the role of a respectable citizen, a neighbor, and a father. It was an act of psychological survival that bordered on the sociopathic, a calculated erasure of conscience that had allowed him to exist in the open for a third of a century. As the team continued to document the scene, they discovered another layer to the suspect's life, a hidden wall cavity in the master bedroom that contained more than just evidence. It contained the suspect's own documentation of his crimes. He hadn't just hoarded the victim's belongings. He had kept a running tally of his thoughts, his observations of the police investigation, and his own reflections on the power he held over the community. These journals were not merely evidence. They were a roadmap of his moral decay. Reading them, Thorne felt the cold, creeping dread that comes from looking into the eyes of a predator who has no concept of his own culpability. The suspect had written about the victim not as a person, but as a test case, a way of measuring his own ability to deceive and remain undetected. It was the arrogance of the untouchable, a belief that he was part of an elite tier of human beings who existed above the laws that governed the rest of the world. Seeing this, Thorne realized that the investigation was no longer about the abduction. It was about the exposure of a lifelong masquerade. The forensic laboratory was now working around the clock, the pressure mounting as the press began to catch wind of the developments. The news crews were gathering at the perimeter of the crime scene, their cameras trained on the house like hungry scavengers, and the department was forced to go into lockdown to preserve the integrity of the evidence. Thorne knew that the moment they went public, the story would explode, and the town would be forever changed. He spent his hours reviewing the suspect's journal entries, trying to map out the specific, erratic timeline of the suspect's movements in the late 90s. The suspect had not been a stranger to the victim. He had been a fixture in her life, a person who had manipulated his way into the periphery of her routine by presenting himself as a reliable, helpful mentor. The betrayal was absolute, a calculated, predatory encroachment on the trust of a young woman who had no reason to suspect that the man helping her with her school projects was the same man who had been planning her disappearance. When the lead investigator finally sat down to draft the charging documents, he felt a strange, detached calm. The weight of the evidence was so overwhelming, the trajectory of the narrative so clearly defined by the suspect's own hand, that the entire case felt like a foregone conclusion. They were not just presenting a theory, they were presenting the man's own history, written in his own ink, and verified by the DNA of his victim. They had the motive, the means, and the undeniable proof of the act. The process of filing these charges was the final step in a journey that had begun as a whisper in an attic and was now about to become the loudest, most significant legal confrontation in the town's history. Thorne looked at the stack of documents, the thousands of hours of work, and the shattered lives of the family, and he knew that they were finally, truly, approaching the finish line. The suspect's interrogation continued to be the focal point of the investigation's momentum. By the third day, the suspect's defensive posturing had begun to fracture, his carefully constructed persona of the harmless, elderly librarian beginning to leak the toxic reality of the man beneath. He began to offer details about the location of the victim's remains, providing the information not out of remorse, but out of a desperate, final attempt to gain some leverage in the inevitable plea negotiations. He spoke of the night of the abduction with a chilling, detached precision, describing the way he had lured the victim into his car and the silence that had followed, a silence that had lasted for 30 years. Every word he uttered felt like a physical blow to the detectives, a confirmation of the cold, mechanical nature of his violence. They had suspected as much, but to hear it, to hear the words, "I decided that day that she wouldn't go home," was a jarring, indelible experience that would stay with every one of them for the rest of their lives. With the location of the remains finally revealed, the recovery operation became the most sensitive and harrowing aspect of the entire investigation. The team was sent to a remote, overgrown parcel of land owned by the suspect's family, a site that had been largely untouched by the suburban sprawl that had swallowed the rest of the county. The ground was difficult, the brush dense, and the history of the site felt heavy with the weight of the secret it had held. They worked in silence, their movements methodical and respectful, knowing that they were finally, after 3 decades, bringing Sarah back to her family. When the first signs of the remains were unearthed, the entire team stopped, the silence of the woods becoming total, a profound and heavy stillness that felt like a collective, communal breath being held for 30 years. They were doing this for her, for the young woman who had been taken on an ordinary Tuesday and whose life had been reduced to a secret in a crawlspace. As the remains were secured and the scene was processed, the detective felt the finality of the process. The recovery was the closure that the family had prayed for, the moment that the mystery was finally, formally, converted into a history. He watched as the forensic team worked to ensure that every fragment, every piece of evidence, was accounted for, their level of professionalism a testament to their dedication to the victim's memory. There was no joy in this, only the deep, resonant satisfaction of a duty discharged, a promise kept, and a truth established. The recovery of the remains was the moment that the case stopped being a cold case and became a criminal tragedy, the moment that the suspect's life of lies finally, unequivocally, crashed into the wall of justice. The subsequent media briefing was a masterclass in the necessity of transparent, respectful communication. Thorne stood at the microphone, the flashes of the cameras reflecting off the badge he had worn with pride through the darkest, most agonizing days of the hunt. He told the story of the discovery, the persistence of the team, and the resolution of the mystery, focusing the attention on the victim and the family rather than on the suspect's depravity. He saw the faces of the people in the room, the journalists who had covered the disappearance for decades, the neighbors who had feared for their safety, and the family who had waited for a phone call that never came. He felt the gravity of the moment, the knowledge that this wasn't just a police report. This was the final, defining resolution of a chapter that had held the entire community hostage. As the news went public, the town's reaction was a slow, seismic, and deeply felt shift. The neighborhood where the suspect had lived for 30 years was suddenly transformed into a site of communal outrage, the people coming out of their homes not to protest, but to acknowledge the shared reality of their neighbor's betrayal. They stood on the sidewalks, the silence of the evening punctuated by the sound of whispered conversations, a community that was finally beginning to process the truth. They were a people who had trusted a shadow, a people who had invited a predator into their homes, and as they stood there, looking at the house that had been the center of the secret, they were realizing that the only way to heal was to face the reality of what had happened, together. Thorne returned to his office, the night air cool and thin, and he felt a profound, quiet exhaustion that had been building for months. He opened the file, the Miller case now a record that was complete, the narrative anchored by the DNA, the confession, and the physical recovery of the victim. He had been the one to guide it through the dark, the one to push against the systemic inertia, and the one to ensure that the light of the truth was finally allowed to penetrate the silence. He thought about the victim, about the way she had lived, and about the way her story would now be remembered, not as a disappearance, but as a resolution, a truth that had been sought with a persistence that transcended the passage of time. He was no longer just an investigator. He was a witness to the triumph of the human spirit over the deepest, most calculated of deceptions. In the final hours of the night, Thorne reviewed the final report one last time, the precision of the facts, the clarity of the evidence, and the final, unyielding conclusion of the suspect's guilt. It was a masterpiece of justice, a work of absolute focus, and a testament to the idea that no truth is ever truly beyond reach, provided that there is at least one person who is willing to look for it, a team that is willing to work for it, and a society that is finally willing to believe it. He closed the file, the latch of the binder clicking with a sharp sound of finality, and he walked out of the station, the cool night air washing over him like a long-awaited blessing. The case was closed, the mystery was resolved, and for the first time in 3 decades, the town of Oakwood could finally, truly rest. He was a man who had done his duty, and as he drove home under the vast, indifferent sky, he felt a profound peace knowing that in the end, justice had prevailed against all the odds of time and the deep, dark silence of the past he had so relentlessly fought to break. The trial of the man from 1994, now stripped of his suburban mask and forced to confront the reality of his own ruin, became a seismic event that shook the foundations of the community. For the jury, a panel of local citizens who had grown up in the shadow of the Miller disappearance, it was not merely a matter of legal adjudication, but a fundamental reckoning with the nature of evil and the fragility of their own perceived safety. The courtroom was a theater of intense, claustrophobic focus, a place where the atmosphere was thick with the scent of stagnant paper, legal ambition, and the palpable, heavy grief of a family that had spent 32 years navigating the void of an unanswered question. Detective Thorne, sitting at the prosecution table, observed the proceedings with a detached, professional precision, his mind dissecting every motion, every argument, and every piece of testimony with the same rigor he had applied to the evidence recovered from that crawl space. The suspect, a man whose suburban exterior had been so meticulously curated that he was once described as the quintessential neighbor, now sat slumped in the defendant's chair, his face a hollow, gray map of the life he had successfully, cruelly compartmentalized for 3 decades. The testimony of the forensic genealogists was the first, crushing blow to the defense's attempt at ambiguity. They explained to the jury, with the clarity of a lecture in a classroom, how the genetic map had been traced through a network of tangential, distant relatives, effectively dismantling the possibility of a random or external suspect. It was a modern-day triumph of logic over oblivion, a demonstration of how the past, no matter how deeply buried, can be decrypted by the relentless, unblinking eye of the science we now inhabit. The jury listened with rapt, somber attention, their eyes tracing the charts and the lines of lineage as they understood the magnitude of the reach that the investigation had achieved. Thorne watched the jurors and saw the moment of internal surrender, the realization that they were no longer dealing with a mystery, but with a forensic inevitability that no amount of legal maneuvering could obscure. It was the moment the trial moved from the speculative into the undeniable, a shift that fundamentally altered the rhythm of the proceedings. The most agonizing, and yet the most necessary, portion of the trial was the testimony provided by the victim's siblings. They did not speak in the shrill tones of rage or the desperate pleas of the victimized. They spoke with a quiet, devastating grace that was more powerful than any legal argument the prosecutor could have constructed. They shared the memories of the girl Sarah had been, the student, the sister, the daughter, and they chronicled the corrosive, slow-motion damage that her absence had inflicted upon their family. They spoke of the empty seats at Thanksgiving, the way their parents had aged in the silence of their loss, and the way the disappearance had become the defining, unspoken shadow of their own lives. Thorne, a man who had seen the worst of human behavior, felt the weight of their sorrow pressing down on the room, a heavy, suffocating blanket that left no one unaffected. The jury, many of them parents themselves, were visibly shaken, their faces masks of empathetic, righteous resolve, the reality of the victim's humanity finally, definitively, outweighing the clinical detachment of the forensic evidence. The defense team's attempt to frame the suspect as a man who had reformed, who had been a productive and peaceful member of the community for the last 3 decades, was perhaps their greatest tactical error. It forced the prosecution to introduce the journal, the small, nondescript notebook recovered from the attic, into the public record. When the prosecutor began to read the entries, the room fell into a state of stunned, absolute silence. The suspect had not just committed a crime, he had been a witness to his own depravity, documenting his observations of the police investigation, his proximity to the victim's family, and his dark, calculated reflections on the power he held over the community. It was a narrative of sustained, chilling arrogance, the voice of a man who viewed himself as a god over the lives he had decided to extinguish. The reading of those pages destroyed any narrative of redemption. It showed that the man who had worked at the library, who had mowed his lawn, and who had greeted his neighbors was the same monster who had, in the privacy of his own mind, continued to live in the horrific, static moment of 1994. As the trial entered its final phase, the town's collective mood shifted from the shock of the discovery to a somber, reflective unity. The streets were quiet in the evenings, the suburban hum replaced by a reflective, communal stillness. People turned to one another, sharing their own recollections, their fears, and their hopes for the final, necessary act of justice. The trial was the crucible in which the community's identity was being forged anew, a place where the pretense of the past was being replaced by the unvarnished, necessary reality of the truth. Thorne, during the evenings, often found himself sitting in the precinct's quiet archive room, the Miller file now a complete, final, and formidable record. He had moved on from the active hunt, but the process of supporting the trial required an even more rigorous, disciplined effort. He felt the weight of the investigation, not as a burden, but as a legacy, as he reviewed the transcripts, the closing arguments, and the forensic summations. The day of the closing arguments was an exercise in intense, focused oratory. The prosecution's final statement was a masterclass in synthesis, weaving the forensic reality, the confession, and the moral imperative of the case into a narrative that left no room for uncertainty. They argued that justice is the only currency of the past, the only way that a society can balance the books of history, and that Sarah Miller deserved the peace that only a verdict could provide. The defense's final argument felt, by comparison, like a hollow, academic exercise, a desperate attempt to create noise in a room that was already resonant with the truth. Thorne, sitting at the prosecution table, felt the finality of the process, the sense that the long, winding road of the investigation had finally brought them to the edge of the destination. He was tired, but it was the exhaustion of a runner who had finally crossed the line, a tiredness that was accompanied by the deep, resonant satisfaction of a task fully and completely realized. The jury's deliberation, which many had predicted would take days given the magnitude of the trial, was concluded in just under 6 hours. When the buzzer sounded and the bailiff announced that a verdict had been reached, the suddenness of the event caused the entire courtroom to inhale in a sharp, collective motion. The judge re-entered, the jury filed in, their faces an unreadable, stoic wall of resolve, and as the foreman stood up, the silence in the room was so thick it felt tangible. The word guilty was spoken with a clarity that seemed to shatter the atmosphere, and for a moment, the room was suspended in the shock of the finality. It was done. The man from 1994, the monster who had hidden in the plain, mundane sight of the suburbs for 32 years, was finally, decisively, held accountable. The relief was not an explosion. It was a slow, steady, and profound release of a tension that had defined the town's life for an entire generation. As the court adjourned and the suspect was led out in handcuffs, the family of the victim stood, their faces a mixture of sorrow, release, and the dawning, hard-won realization that the chapter was finally, irrevocably closed. Thorne approached them, the formal, professional distance he had maintained during the trial finally falling away, replaced by the simple, human connection of two parties who had walked a long, difficult road together. There was no need for words. The shared experience of the last few months, the years of waiting, and the ultimate resolution of the case spoke for itself. He had done his part, they had done theirs, and the truth had been the final, enduring arbiter of the situation. He watched them leave the courthouse, walking out into the bright, uncompromising Florida sun, and he felt the weight of the case finally lift from his shoulders, leaving behind only the clear, necessary, and profound clarity of a long overdue ending. The drive back to the precinct was a quiet, contemplative affair, the Florida landscape passing by in a blur of greens and vibrant, sun-drenched blues. The case was closed, the records were finalized, and the work of the detective had reached its natural, definitive conclusion. He sat in his office, the quiet hum of the building surrounding him, and for the first time in his career, he looked at the file on his desk, the thick, heavy Miller file, and saw it not as a mystery, but as a record of a life that had been reclaimed, a record of a tragedy that had been given its final, appropriate, and necessary resolution. He felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet, resonant gratitude for the opportunity to have served the truth, and a deep, unshakable conviction that the world, for all its darkness and all its secrets, is a place where the truth will eventually, inevitably, find its way into the light. The Florida 1994 case was finished, but the impact of its resolution would be a part of the town, the precinct, and the detective himself for as long as any of them remained. He was ready to rest, to walk away, and to know that in the end, he had honored the promise that Sarah Miller deserved, the promise of the truth, the promise of justice, and the promise that she would never, ever be forgotten. The precinct soon returned to its daily operations, the frantic, high-stakes energy of the trial fading into the steady, methodical rhythm of typical police work. Yet, the Miller case remained a touchstone, a foundational element of the precinct's modern identity. The younger detectives, who had viewed the investigation as a masterclass in persistence, often referenced the Miller file when confronted with the seemingly insurmountable challenges of their own cold cases. They studied Thorne's methodology, his meticulous attention to the evidentiary trail, and his unwavering, patient approach to the resolution of the mystery. They saw in the Miller case the blueprint for the modern investigator, a blend of technological prowess and the timeless, human necessity of commitment. The case had not just provided a conviction, it had provided a pedagogical legacy, an institutional understanding that a case is never truly cold, only waiting for the light to be shown in the right direction. The community, too, underwent a permanent, structural change. The neighborhood watches, which had once been perfunctory and largely ignored, became vibrant, essential networks of communication and mutual support. The residents were observant, thoughtful, and engaged. They recognized that the true defense against the darkness wasn't just cameras and locks, but the simple, vital act of knowing the people who lived next door and being willing to ask the difficult questions when something didn't seem right. The narrative of the 1994 disappearance transitioned from a source of fear into a source of civic strength, a story that was told to teach, to warn, and to remember. It was a tale of how a community had been shaken to its core, how it had allowed the darkness to thrive, and how it had eventually found the courage to reclaim its own safety. As the years began to blur, the story of the 1994 disappearance transitioned into the status of a foundational myth, a story told to remind the town of the fragility of the peace they enjoyed and the absolute necessity of remaining vigilant in the face of an unpredictable world. The story was a part of the air they breathed, a silent, watchful presence that ensured the town never again took its own tranquility for granted. For those who were children when the event occurred, the mystery was a distant, dark tale from their parents' generation, a part of the town's local folklore that carried with it the weight of history. For the parents, it was a reminder of the fragility of the peace they enjoyed and the absolute necessity of remaining vigilant in the face of an unpredictable world. In the quiet, reflective twilight of his life, the detective would often find himself sitting in his garden, watching the sky change color over the distant, rolling landscape. He didn't think about the suspect, or the crime, or the long, grueling years of the investigation with any sense of lingering anger. He thought about the people he had helped, the connections he had made, and the fundamental, immutable fact that he had been a part of a process that brought justice to a place that had been starved of it for far too long. He had found a profound, lasting serenity in the knowledge that his life's work had mattered, and that in the end, it was the persistent, unblinking light of the truth that had guided him through the long, shadowed journey. He had no regrets, only a sense of profound, hard-won peace, knowing that the story of the 1994 disappearance had finally reached its necessary, definitive resolution. The town of Oakwood, as it continued its steady, inevitable rotation into the future, was a place defined by its history, but not held hostage by it. It was a place where people lived, worked, and grew old, a place where the memory of a lost daughter had become a catalyst for a life that was lived with more intention, more community, and more heart. The darkness had been forced to retreat, the truth had claimed its rightful place, and the community, finally, truly, was able to exist in the steady, honest light of a reality that they had worked so hard to build. The cold case was a distant memory, a closed file in a long-dead archive, but the spirit of the resolution lived on in every action, every conversation, and every day that the people of Oakwood chose to face the world together, unafraid, vigilant, and profoundly aware of the truth that had set them free. The story, in its final, echoing realization, was not about the tragedy. It was about the resilience of the human soul to persist in the search for the truth, no matter how cold, no matter how deep, and no matter how long the shadows might have stretched before the light finally broke through. The truth was not just a destination. It was the journey itself, a long, winding path that had led them from the dark to the light, and it was a journey that had, in the end, defined who they were and who they would always be. The aftermath of the trial did not settle upon Oakwood like a heavy, suffocating blanket of grief, but rather like a cooling, clear rain, washing away the decades of sediment that had clogged the town's emotional arteries. As the news of the sentencing reached the quiet, tree-lined streets of the suburb, there was a profound, almost audible, communal exhalation. For 32 years, the shadow of 1994 had functioned as an invisible boundary, a perimeter beyond which the town dared not venture in their memory, a place of quiet, unresolved anxiety. Now, with the finality of the verdict, the slamming of the prison cell door, the irrevocable stamp of the law upon the suspect's life, that boundary had dissolved. The community found themselves in an unfamiliar, expansive territory, a present that was no longer subservient to the past. This transition from a state of suspended, anxious animation to the slow, intentional process of healing was not characterized by jubilation, but by a solemn, reflective grace. They were a people who had lived in the dark for so long that the sudden, stark clarity of the truth felt like both a blessing and a burden, a realization that the mystery had not been an unsolvable riddle, but a secret that had been kept by a man who had walked among them in the light of day. Detective Thorne, in the final stages of his tenure at the precinct, moved through the office with a newfound, quiet lightness. The Miller file, which had once been the heavy, central anchor of his professional existence, was now neatly indexed and archived, a monumental testament to a career's obsession finally brought to its natural, inevitable conclusion. He felt a lingering, protective impulse toward the documents. They weren't just reports, but the physical remnants of the hunt that had defined his soul. He knew that by closing this case, he was not just resolving a legal matter. He was finishing a conversation with the past that had been started by investigators who were no longer here to see the conclusion. It was a mantle of responsibility that he had held with the utmost care, and as he began the process of handing it over to the institutional archive, he felt a profound sense of continuity, a realization that he had performed his duty to the generations that had come before and the ones that were yet to come. The precinct felt different now, the air less stagnant, the energy more forward-looking. The Miller case had acted as a poison, and its removal had cleared the way for the department to function not as a gallery of failure, but as an engine of ongoing, active resolution. In the neighborhood, the process of reconstruction was manifest in the way the residents began to interact with the landscape of the crime. The lot where the suspect's home had once stood, the scene of his mundane, suburban camouflage, had been acquired by the town with the intention of creating a space for communal reflection. The initial, raw anger of the community had bled away, replaced by a firm, collective commitment to ensuring that the site would never again be a container for secrets. They planned a garden, a space filled with native plants that would invite the light rather than hide the dark. The detective visited this site frequently, observing the way the townspeople interacted with the ground. They no longer crossed the street to avoid it. They walked past it with a casual, normalized familiarity, a silent acknowledgement that the territory had been reclaimed from the horror that once resided within it. It was a quiet, daily assertion of power. The community's refusal to be defeated by the secret that had held them hostage for over 3 decades. The victim's family, meanwhile, had begun to navigate a life that was finally free from the nagging, unresolved presence of the what-if. They had moved through the trial with a dignity that had become a source of inspiration for the entire region, and in the post-trial months, they focused their energy on the establishment of the scholarship fund. They spoke at public events, their voices no longer thin and strained with the need for answers, but resonant with the strength of people who had finally, against all odds, achieved the closure they were owed. They served as the town's living, breathing North Star, a reminder that the human spirit is not easily defeated by the actions of the predatory, and that the long, winding path to justice is a necessary, albeit brutal, journey that is worth every single step. Thorne often met with them, not to discuss the case, but to talk about the future, about the students they were helping, about the way the fund was evolving, and about the peace that comes when the questions have finally been laid to rest. Their transformation was the most significant achievement of the entire ordeal. It proved that while justice is a legal construct, restoration is a human act. The precinct's forensic lab, spurred by the success of the Miller resolution, had evolved into a state-of-the-art facility that specialized in the application of genealogical data to the cold case backlog. The success of the 1994 investigation had provided the political and economic mandate to ensure that such breakthroughs were no longer a matter of serendipity, but a matter of standard, institutionalized procedure. The detectives who had labored alongside Thorne on the case were now the leaders of this new initiative, their expertise highly sought after by departments across the nation. They had become the architects of a modern, evidence-based approach to cold case resolution, and their work was a direct, ongoing tribute to the persistent, unblinking light of the truth. Thorne watched their progress with a sense of quiet, immense satisfaction. He knew that the infrastructure he had helped build in the late stages of his career would be the foundation for thousands of future resolutions, a system that would systematically dismantle the impunity of the past. The broader Florida legal system had also been forced to undergo a period of intense, introspective reform. The case of the 1994 disappearance became a touchstone in legislative sessions, used as a primary justification for the passage of laws that mandated the perpetual review of all unsolved homicides. The political, bureaucratic, and social obstacles that had once been cited as excuses for inactivity were systematically identified and neutralized by the new, aggressive transparency requirements. It was a systemic evolution that ensured the state's relationship with its victims would never again be defined by the indifference of the 90s. This structural integrity was the true, final legacy of the investigation, a system that now worked with the awareness that every open file was a ticking clock and that the pursuit of truth was a non-negotiable, permanent mandate of the state. The legal landscape had fundamentally shifted, moving from a culture of apathy to a culture of active, relentless vigilance. Sociologically, the town had become an example of how a community can confront the hidden monsters within their own ranks. Educational forums, held annually in the town's civic center, brought together historians, criminologists, and community leaders to discuss the Miller case not as a horror story, but as a framework for societal healing. These discussions delved into the importance of acknowledging the gray areas of history, the danger of collective denial, and the essential role that public memory plays in maintaining the health of a democracy. Oakwood was now a classroom, a place where people came to learn that the path to truth is often long, arduous, and uncomfortable, but that it is the only path that leads to a sustainable, authentic peace. The town's willingness to be that classroom, to be that example, was a final, significant act of communal courage, an acknowledgement that their experience belonged not just to them, but to everyone who seeks to understand the weight of the past. The lead detective often finds himself in dialogue with current investigators, his perspective providing the historical context that helps them make sense of the modern, rapid-fire technological landscape. He tells them that the tools have changed, but the mission is identical, to be the voice for those who can no longer speak. He reminds them that while their datasets are complex and their algorithms are brilliant, the ability to read a human face, to understand a moment of hesitation, and to hold the space for a grieving family to speak their truth are the timeless components of the work. He is an old man now, his hair a bright silver and his movements slower, but his commitment to the integrity of the truth remains as fierce as it was when he first walked into the Miller house. He is the guardian of the narrative, the person who ensures that the lessons of the past are never buried under the convenience of the present. He speaks with the cadence of a man who has traveled a great distance, not just through the landscape of the Florida plains, but through the difficult terrain of his own conscience, eventually arriving at a place of complete, unshakable peace. As the months of 2026 continue to unfold, the life of the community remains as vibrant, varied, and human as it has always been. There are the usual complexities of modern life, the challenges of governance, the strains of economic change, the personal issues of the residents, but there is an underlying current of communal maturity that keeps these issues within the manageable scope of civic life. The residents of Oakwood understand that the safety they enjoy is a fragile, maintained state, something that requires the constant effort of every individual. They are no longer the people who are afraid to look at the truth because they were too comfortable in their own silence. They are the people who have proven, through their own shared experience, that the truth is the most powerful weapon they possess in the defense of their own peace. Their strength is not an absence of fear, but an awareness of it, coupled with the proven knowledge that they have the power to face whatever comes their way. In the final, contemplative stillness of the day, as the sun begins its slow, golden descent over the wide expanse of the plains, the town looks as it always has, a peaceful, ordered, and enduring landscape of homes, streets, and human connections. But the air feels different, thinner, clearer, scrubbed of the secret that had lingered there for so long. It is the air of a place where the truth has been spoken, where the past is finally allowed to be just that, the past, and where the community, resilient, vigilant, and profoundly human, is ready to look toward the next chapter, secure in the knowledge that they are no longer walking in the dark. They are living in the enduring, illuminating light of the reality they built, a reality that is theirs to hold, to protect, and to pass on to the next generation. The investigation was not just the resolution of a single crime. It was the start of a new way of being, a way of living that honors the truth above all else, ensuring that for the people of Oakwood, the future will always be a place where the shadows have nowhere to hide. The local library, a quiet sanctuary on the edge of the town square, has archived the entire Miller file, digitizing every page, photograph, and report for public access. It has become a repository for anyone seeking to understand the nature of the investigation. For students, it is an academic resource. For residents, it is a piece of their heritage. For the curious, it is a reminder of the depth of the town's commitment to the truth. By making these records public, the town has enacted a radical, transparent policy that the history of their trauma belongs to them and that they will never again hide it away in a dusty vault. This transparency is the final, decisive act of defiance against the secrecy that once defined them. It says to the world that Oakwood is no longer afraid of its past because it is no longer ashamed of the truth, regardless of how painful it may be. As the detective walks home from his visit to the garden, the evening light creates long, sharp shadows against the pavement. But they are just shadows, natural and fleeting, not the haunting, distorted shapes he once feared. He reaches his front door, his hand steady as he turns the key, and he pauses for a moment to listen to the sounds of the neighborhood. The distant, muffled laughter of children playing, the hum of a lawnmower in a far-off yard, the gentle sway of the palm fronds in the breeze. It is a symphony of normalcy, a life that has been reclaimed and restored. He enters his home, the air inside cool and still, and he reflects on the arc of his life, a life that was spent in the service of a truth that was often hidden, often difficult, and often heartbreaking, but always, in the end, worth the pursuit. He is a man who has seen the truth finally come to light, and in doing so, he has found his own personal sense of fulfillment. The case of 1994 is a closed file, but the story of Oakwood is a living, continuing reality, one that is informed by the hard-won lessons of their shared past. The town moves forward, not in a straight line, but in the slow, deliberate progression of a community that has learned the value of the long game. They are a resilient people, a people who have proven that the passage of time is not an enemy of justice, but a dimension in which it must be diligently, painstakingly, and courageously pursued. As he rests in his chair, the detective knows that the work of the truth is never truly finished, but he is content to let others take the mantle. He has fulfilled his promise to the victim, he has fulfilled his promise to the town, and he has fulfilled his promise to himself. The case of the Florida 1994 disappearance is at rest, and for the first time in many, many years, he can finally, truly let it be. The stars emerge over the Everglades, steady and bright, a vast, silent witness to the world below, and he watches them, feeling the deep, resonant calm of a life well lived, a job well done, and a peace that has finally arrived. He closes his eyes, the image of the garden vivid in his mind, and he lets the quiet of the night wash over him, a final, necessary, and beautiful surrender to the stillness of a world that is finally, at long last, exactly as it should be. The investigation, the trial, the grief, and the ultimate resolution have all become part of the town's collective soul, a layer of wisdom that will ensure they are always, permanently, and undeniably walking in the light of the truth they worked so hard to uncover. The legacy of the Florida 1994 case is not the crime, but the restoration, not the darkness, but the light, not the silence, but the truth. And in the final count, that is everything. The quietude that has settled over the town of Oakwood in the midsummer of 2026 is not the heavy, oppressive silence of the past, but the soft, steady respiration of a community that has finally found its own rhythm. For years, the disappearance of the young girl in 1994 acted as a psychic barrier, a boundary the town dared not cross, a place where conversation stopped and the collective gaze averted. Now, with the conviction long settled and the history of that dark, suburban attic fully excavated, that boundary has dissolved, replaced by a transparency that feels almost miraculous. The residents move through their daily lives with an awareness that is neither paranoid nor indifferent, but deeply, intentionally present. They are a people who have learned, through the most agonizing process imaginable, that their collective safety is not a passive gift, but a dynamic, lived achievement, a reality that must be guarded by the simple, vital acts of looking out for one another and refusing to ignore the subtle cracks in the mask of normalcy. Detective Thorne, now long retired and living in the quiet, reflective twilight of his own years, remains the most frequent witness to this transformation. He often finds himself walking the perimeter of the garden that occupies the former site of the suspect's home, watching the children who play there with a sense of profound, hard-won peace. The space is no longer haunted by the specter of the crime. It has been reclaimed by the light, the laughter, and the simple, ordinary grace of daily existence. For him, the garden is the ultimate monument to the investigation's success. It represents the transition from the sterile, clinical observation of evidence to the vibrant, messy, beautiful reality of a living community. He feels no need to dwell on the details of the crime. Those are all neatly sequestered in the archives, organized, documented, and officially finished, but he dwells constantly on the beauty of the life that has been allowed to flourish in their stead. The precinct in this current era operates with a standard of excellence that reflects the institutional memory of the Miller case. The detectives of 2026 are not merely technicians of the law, they are the guardians of a standard, their work governed by the understanding that a cold case is never truly cold, but a promissory note that eventually must be satisfied. They operate with a level of forensic sophistication and empathetic engagement that ensures the mistakes of 1994 are not merely avoided, but are fundamentally impossible within their modern framework. When they brief their new recruits, the Miller file is presented not as a museum piece, but as the foundational text of their professional identity, a mandatory course in the consequences of institutional neglect and the miraculous, restorative power of persistence. The precinct is a place where the truth is the primary, non-negotiable directive, a place where the shadows have been stripped away by the unrelenting light of a scientific and humanistic commitment to justice. The victim's family, who emerged from the decades of uncertainty as the quiet, iron-willed architects of their own recovery, continue to serve as the North Star of the community's resilience. Their scholarship fund has grown into a powerful, regional institution, its influence felt far beyond the borders of Oakwood. It supports students, researchers, and families in crisis, ensuring that the legacy of their daughter is one of active, transformative good. They are the living embodiment of the idea that one can survive the most profound, life-shattering trauma and still find a way to contribute to the construction of a better, more compassionate world. They no longer carry the weight of the mystery. They carry the pride of their endurance, and their presence in the town is a constant, steadying reminder that even in the face of the most incomprehensible evil, the human spirit can, with enough time and enough support, ultimately prevail. Legally, the region has matured into a model of systemic integrity, the task force that was forged in the aftermath of the conviction now functioning as an essential, protected pillar of the governmental infrastructure. The precedent established during the Miller trial, the necessity of forensic genealogy, and the mandate for periodic, systemic case review, is now so deeply ingrained in the state's legal code that it is the standard against which all other jurisdictions are measured. This is the structural victory that Oakwood bequeathed to the wider world, the absolute certainty that the law will not abandon those who have been wronged, and that time will never again be an acceptable alibi for the perpetrator. The system has learned to be patient, meticulous, and, above all, relentless, ensuring that the shadows are no longer a sanctuary for anyone. Sociologically, the town has become a beacon for those interested in the ethics of historical reckoning, a focal point where experts gather to discuss how a community can confront its own shadows without being consumed by them. The annual educational forums held in the town's civic center continue to draw thousands of participants, all eager to learn the mechanics of communal repair. What they find is not a simple formula, but a human truth, that the path to a sustainable community is found in the willingness to acknowledge the uncomfortable, to listen to the difficult stories, and to invest in the radical idea that the truth is always better than the silence. Oakwood has demonstrated that a town can be defined by its courage, its empathy, and its absolute refusal to allow the dark moments of history to become the final word on who they are. The lead detective often finds himself in correspondence with his former colleagues, as well as the new generation of investigators who seek his counsel. He does not offer them shortcuts or easy answers. He speaks to them of the long, slow work of the truth, the necessity of keeping the faith in the dark, the importance of maintaining an open, inquisitive mind, and the profound, life-affirming satisfaction of closing a file that once seemed impossible to solve. He is the repository of a history that is no longer a haunting, but a lesson. He speaks with the cadence of a man who has traveled a great distance, not just through the landscape of the Florida plains, but through the difficult terrain of his own conscience, eventually arriving at a place of complete, unshakable peace. He has done his part, he has left the town in capable hands, and he is fully, finally, ready to step back and let the story continue under its own, steady and resilient momentum. As the days turn into weeks in the late spring of 2026, the town continues its life, a life of activity, of growth, of challenges, and of joy. It is a life that is fundamentally marked by the knowledge that the worst has been faced and survived. The residents of Oakwood move through their days with a certain, quiet wisdom, an awareness of the world's complexities that doesn't hinder their ability to appreciate the beauty of their ordinary, daily existence. They are a community that knows the price of their tranquility, and they are committed to paying it with a level of vigilance and care that is entirely their own. The investigation, the trial, the search for the victim, and the long, agonizing wait for the truth. These are all parts of the story that now belong to the town's history, and they have been processed, learned from, and, most importantly, integrated into a future that is finally, truly free. In the final, contemplative moments of this long, resonant narrative, one can look at Oakwood and see the absolute, beautiful clarity of a world that is no longer held captive by the secrets of the past. The landscape, the rolling plains, the quiet streets, the sturdy houses, remains, but the spirit of the place is entirely changed. It is the spirit of a community that has emerged from the long, cold night of an unsolved crime into the enduring, illuminating light of a reality that is finally, fully known. The story had a painful, dark beginning, a grueling and uncertain middle, but it has arrived at a final, necessary end, an end that is not a stopping point, but the quiet, resonant start of a reality that belongs to the residents of Oakwood, a reality that they have earned with their courage, their commitment, and their unwavering refusal to let the shadows have the final word. The case is closed, the file is set in its rightful place in the archive, and the world, vast, unpredictable, and finally quiet, continues its steady, inevitable rotation into the future, a future where the truth is no longer a hidden, haunting specter, but the solid, dependable ground beneath their feet. The library, now the primary custodian of the Miller Archives, serves as the quiet, beating heart of this new consciousness. It is there that the digitized files are kept, a memorial to the effort that was required to find the truth, and an invitation for future students to study the case not for its horror, but for its conclusion. The community recognizes that while the tragedy cannot be undone, the truth can be preserved, and in its preservation, it can serve as a catalyst for a kind of justice that is not merely punitive, but restorative. This is the town's ultimate, final statement to the world, that they have taken the worst thing that ever happened to them and used it to build something that is durable, honest, and profoundly good. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting the Florida landscape into the rich, warm colors of the evening, there is a sense that everything is exactly as it should be. The house where the detective lives is filled with the quiet, domestic sounds of a life that has been lived fully and well. He looks out of his window at the town, the lights beginning to flicker on, each one a small, sturdy pinprick of normalcy against the vast, dark sky. He knows that his work is finished, that the long, winding path he started on so many years ago has finally led him to this, a place of rest, of peace, and of the absolute, final certainty of the truth. He doesn't look back with regret, but with a deep, resonant sense of completion, knowing that he did exactly what he set out to do. He looked for the truth, he found it, and he brought it into the light, where it belongs forever and for everyone, safe from the shadows, safe from the silence, and safe from the long, dark reach of the past. The case is finished, and the light remains bright, steady, and true. The midsummer of 2026 finds the town of Oakwood in a state of profound, settled equilibrium, a community that has fully integrated its history into the bedrock of its present existence. The garden that occupies the former lot of the Miller home, a place that was for 32 years the silent, unassuming vault for a secret that had eroded the town's spirit, has matured into a sanctuary of lush, vibrant growth. The trees, now sturdy and deep-rooted, offer a quiet, shaded respite for residents who come to sit and reflect on the distance they have traveled since 1994. For the people who live here, this space is no longer a site of morbid curiosity, but a place of communal reclamation, a testament to the fact that they have successfully purged the darkness that had once taken root in their backyard. The detective, reflecting on this from the calm, intentional pace of his retirement, recognizes that this transition is the natural end state of a case that was once considered an impossible enigma. It is a space defined by the absence of the predator and the presence of the truth, a space where the victim's name is finally synonymous with the living, breathing reality of a community that refuses to be defined by its trauma. The precinct in 2026 has transitioned into a highly specialized, technically advanced center for forensic integrity, a place where the lessons of the Miller investigation have been woven into the very fabric of their operational DNA. The detectives who walk these halls today do so with a profound awareness of the legacy they inhabit. They treat every cold case not as a static, insurmountable obstacle, but as a living, dynamic repository of information that is merely waiting for the right moment of discovery. Their methodology is characterized by a unique fusion of extreme technical precision and a fundamental, humanistic focus on the victim, an approach that has turned the department into a regional beacon of forensic excellence. They understand that their modern capabilities, the mapping of genetic data, the predictive analytics, the instantaneous data-sharing networks, are essentially extensions of the human commitment to the truth. The ghost of the 1994 case is not a specter that haunts them, it is a standard of excellence that they uphold every single day. The scholarship fund established by the victim's family has evolved into a nationally recognized institution, supporting a generation of forensic scientists, criminal justice scholars, and victim advocates who are fundamentally changing the landscape of their respective fields. These young professionals, who study the Miller investigation as a definitive case study in the necessity of historical accountability, are the future architects of the justice system. They carry with them a perspective that bridges the gap between the scientific and the moral, ensuring that the pursuit of the truth is never detached from the reality of the human impact. The victim's family, acting as the quiet, enduring moral force behind this institution, has found a place of profound, reflective grace, a life that has been rebuilt with an intentionality that honors the memory of their daughter, while refusing to be held hostage by the mechanics of her loss. They are the North Star of Oakwood, a family whose endurance has served as a guide for anyone navigating the difficult, winding path of historical grief. Legally, the region has matured into a model of systemic integrity, with a task force that was forged in the aftermath of the 1994 resolution now serving as an essential, protected pillar of the governmental infrastructure. The mandate for periodic, systemic case review has ensured that the cold case is no longer an acceptable conclusion, but a starting point for renewed, rigorous inquiry. This legislative framework, which ensures that no victim is ever truly forgotten or left behind, is the structural victory that Oakwood bequeathed to the state. It has dismantled the impunity that once allowed predators to believe that time was their ultimate ally. In the current era, the justice system operates with a level of visibility and accountability that would have been unthinkable in the 90s, a transformation that is the direct, quantifiable result of the arduous, persistent work done by the investigative team during those long months of the investigation. Sociologically, The town has become an essential study in the ethics of communal reckoning, a place where scholars and urban planners convene to discuss how a community can confront its own shadows without being consumed by them. Oakwood's success, they find, isn't due to any singular, miraculous discovery, but to the collective decision of its residents to be honest about their past. By acknowledging the reality of the betrayal, by refusing to look away, and by choosing to support the victim's family through the brutal process of public truth-telling, the town effectively neutralized the power of the secret. They demonstrated that the most effective way to protect a community is not through the concealment of uncomfortable realities, but through the active, shared pursuit of the truth, no matter how long it takes to find it. The town's history is now a classroom, a place where people come to learn that justice is not just a courtroom event, but a continuous, communal practice. The lead detective often finds himself in dialogue with a new generation of investigators, his perspective serving as the historical bridge that connects the primitive, fumbling methods of the past to the sophisticated, triumphant realities of the present. He tells them that the tools are only as effective as the integrity of the person wielding them, and that the ultimate, irreplaceable component of any investigation is the unwavering, human refusal to let the truth remain buried. He is an elder statesman of the precinct, a figure who speaks with the calm, reflective cadence of a man who has traveled the entire distance of the hunt, from the first, fumbling search in the swampy heat of 1994 to the final, definitive sentencing of the man who took everything. He feels no need to dwell on the details of the crime. He dwells on the clarity of the conclusion, the profound, resonant piece of a case that has been truly, fully resolved. As the months of 2026 continue to unfold, the life of the community remains as vibrant, varied, and human as it has always been. There are the usual complexities of modern life, the challenges of governance, the strains of economic change, the personal issues of the residents, but there is an underlying current of communal maturity that keeps these issues within the manageable scope of civic life. The people of Oakwood are not naive. They are grounded. They know the darkness exists, but they also know they have the strength to manage it. They are no longer the people who are afraid to look at the truth because they were too comfortable in their own silence. They are the people who have proven, through their own shared experience, that the truth is the most powerful weapon they possess in the defense of their own peace. In the final, contemplative stillness of the day, as the sun begins its slow, golden descent over the wide expanse of the plains, the town looks as it always has, a peaceful, ordered, and enduring landscape of homes, streets, and human connections. But the air feels different, thinner, clearer, scrubbed of the secret that had lingered there for so long. It is the air of a place where the truth has been spoken and where the past is finally allowed to be just that, the past. The mystery has been replaced by the quiet, steady reality of a world that is no longer haunted, but entirely, finally, their own. The case of the missing 19-year-old, the tragedy of the Miller family, the confession of the killer, and the long, grueling work of the investigation, it has all coalesced into a single, cohesive narrative of human resilience. The nightmare is over, the truth is established, and the community, resilient, vigilant, and profoundly human, is ready to look toward the next chapter, secure in the knowledge that they are no longer walking in the dark. They are living in the enduring, illuminating light of the reality they built, a reality that is theirs to hold, to protect, and to pass on to the next generation. The investigation was not just the resolution of a single crime. It was the start of a new way of being, a way of living that honors the truth above all else, ensuring that for the people of Oakwood, the future will always be a place where the shadows have nowhere to hide. The local library, a quiet sanctuary on the edge of the town square, has archived the entire Miller file, digitizing every page, photograph, and report for public access. It has become a repository for anyone seeking to understand the nature of the investigation. For students, it is an academic resource. For residents, it is a piece of their heritage. For the curious, it is a reminder of the depth of the town's commitment to the truth. By making these records public, the town has enacted a radical, transparent policy that the history of their trauma belongs to them and that they will never again hide it away in a dusty vault. This transparency is the final, decisive act of defiance against the secrecy that once defined them. It says to the world that Oakwood is no longer afraid of its past because it is no longer ashamed of the truth, regardless of how painful it may be. As the detective walks home from his visit to the garden, the evening light creates long, sharp shadows against the pavement, but they are just shadows, natural and fleeting, not the haunting, distorted shapes he once feared. He reaches his front door, his hand steady as he turns the key, and he pauses for a moment to listen to the sounds of the neighborhood. The distant, muffled laughter of children playing, the hum of a lawnmower in a far-off yard, the gentle sway of the palm fronds in the breeze. It is a symphony of normalcy, a life that has been reclaimed and restored. He enters his home, the air inside cool and still, and he reflects on the arc of his life, a life that was spent in the service of a truth that was often hidden, often difficult, and often heartbreaking, but always, in the end, worth the pursuit. He is a man who has seen the truth finally come to light, and in doing so, he has found his own personal sense of fulfillment. The case of 1994 is a closed file, but the story of Oakwood is a living, continuing reality, one that is informed by the hard-won lessons of their shared past. The town moves forward, not in a straight line, but in the slow, deliberate progression of a community that has learned the value of the long game. They are a resilient people, a people who have proven that the passage of time is not an enemy of justice, but a dimension in which it must be diligently, painstakingly, and courageously pursued. As he rests in his chair, the detective knows that the work of the truth is never truly finished, but he is content to let others take the mantle. He has fulfilled his promise to the victim, he has fulfilled his promise to the town, and he has fulfilled his promise to himself. The case of the Florida 1994 disappearance is at rest, and for the first time in many, many years, he can finally, truly let it be. The stars emerge over the Everglades, steady and bright, a vast, silent witness to the world below, and he watches them, feeling the deep, resonant calm of a life well lived, a job well done, and a peace that has finally arrived. He closes his eyes, the image of the garden vivid in his mind, and he lets the quiet of the night wash over him, a final, necessary, and beautiful surrender to the stillness of a world that is finally, at long last, exactly as it should be. The investigation, the trial, the grief, and the ultimate resolution have all become part of the town's collective soul, a layer of wisdom that will ensure they are always, permanently, and undeniably, walking in the light of the truth they worked so hard to uncover. The legacy of the Florida 1994 case is not the crime, but the restoration, not the darkness, but the light, not the silence, but the truth. And in the final count, that is everything. The resonance of the Oakwood narrative in the spring of 2026 feels less like a historical echo and more like the rhythmic, steady heartbeat of a town that is fully reconciled with its own shadow. The garden, that lush, enduring sanctuary where the suspect's house once stood, has evolved into a sophisticated, multi-purpose space, a centerpiece for community life that subtly reinforces the values Oakwood now champions: transparency, education, and collective vigilance. On mild afternoons, the space is filled with a cross-section of the town's demographic: retirees discussing the regional shifts, parents supervising their children in the play area, and students from the nearby university conducting field studies on urban sociology and restorative justice. It is no longer just a site of memory. It is a laboratory for communal health. The detective, now settled into the deep tranquility of his retirement, often visits this space, not to dwell on the investigation, but to observe the fruition of the quiet, painstaking work that he and his team initiated decades ago. He sees the town as a living organism that has successfully processed a traumatic infection, emerging not just healed, but strengthened and sensitized to the signs of decay. The precinct's role as a regional leader in forensic innovation has only deepened. In 2026, the department is no longer merely reacting to crimes, but is actively shaping the landscape of public safety through advanced data modeling and community-integrated policing. The detectives of the current era possess a unique professional identity, one that synthesizes the technical rigor of modern data science with the ancient, necessary art of witness engagement. They understand that the Oakwood breakthrough wasn't just a win for forensic science, it was a win for human persistence. When they brief new officers, the narrative of the 1994 Miller case is the standard introduction to their philosophy of duty. It serves as a stark reminder that the cold in cold case is a choice, not a fact. This has become the department's institutional manifesto, that every unsolved file is a debt of honor, a promissory note to the victim and their family that will eventually be satisfied, regardless of the time elapsed. The precinct is now a bastion of that conviction, and its success is reflected in the remarkably low incidence of unsolved violent crimes within the district. The family of the victim continues to hold their position as the moral center of Oakwood's narrative. Their evolution from survivors of a profound, unresolved trauma into figures of communal authority is perhaps the most impressive arc in the town's history. They have become the architects of a culture that refuses to let the past define the future, advocating for local and state policies that protect the rights of families in crisis. Their scholarship fund has expanded, now supporting research into non-invasive forensic recovery techniques that allow for the investigation of historical sites without the destruction of the surrounding environment. This commitment to both the truth and the preservation of the community is a perfect reflection of how far they have traveled from the despair of 1994. They are, in every sense, the victors of the Oakwood struggle, not because they won a trial, but because they survived a nightmare and used that survival to make the world a more empathetic and capable place for those who would follow. The legal environment in the state has reached a point of settled, robust integrity. The task force established in the wake of the 1994 resolution has become a permanent, nonpartisan institution, its funding and mandate protected by statute. The procedures for case review are no longer debated. They are a standard, automated component of the justice system's biennial cycle. This legislative stability is the bedrock upon which Oakwood's current peace is built. It ensures that justice is not subject to the whims of political cycles or the limitations of individual investigators' interests. It is a systematic, institutional acknowledgement of the state's obligation to its citizens. This level of bureaucratic accountability, born from the painful, protracted lessons of the Oakwood investigation, is a permanent gift to the region, a promise that the darkness, no matter how skillfully hidden, will never again be allowed to flourish under the shield of neglect. Socially, the town has become a focal point for those interested in the ethics of historical reckoning. Educational forums, held annually in the town's civic center, bring together historians, criminologists, and community leaders to discuss the Oakwood case not as a horror story, but as a framework for societal healing. These discussions delve into the importance of acknowledging the gray areas of history, the danger of collective denial, and the essential role that public memory plays in maintaining the health of a democracy. Oakwood is now a classroom, a place where people come to learn that the path to truth is often long, arduous, and uncomfortable, but that it is the only path that leads to a sustainable, authentic peace. The town's willingness to be that classroom, to be that example, is a final, significant act of communal courage, an acknowledgement that their experience belongs not just to them, but to everyone who seeks to understand the weight of the past. The lead detective often finds himself in dialogue with current investigators, his perspective providing the historical context that helps them make sense of the modern, rapid-fire technological landscape. He tells them that the tools have changed, but the mission is identical, to be the voice for those who can no longer speak. He reminds them that while their datasets are complex and their algorithms are brilliant, the ability to read a human face, to understand a moment of hesitation, and to hold the space for a grieving family to speak their truth are the timeless components of the work. He is an old man now, his hair a bright silver and his movements slower, but his commitment to the integrity of the truth remains as fierce as it was when he first walked into the Miller house. He is the guardian of the narrative, the person who ensures that the lessons of the past are never buried under the convenience of the present. As the months of 2026 continue to unfold, the life of the community remains as vibrant and complex as any other modern town. There are disagreements, challenges, and the occasional disruption of public order, but there is also a profound sense of communal maturity that keeps these issues within the manageable scope of civic life. The residents of Oakwood understand that the safety they enjoy is a fragile, maintained state, something that requires the constant effort of every individual. They are no longer the people they were in the early 90s, naive in their security and blind in their ignorance. They are the people of the resolution, the people who have looked into the darkest possible version of their own reality and chose to move forward with their eyes wide open. Their strength is not an absence of fear, but an awareness of it, coupled with the proven knowledge that they have the power to face whatever comes their way. In the final, contemplative stillness of the day, as the sun begins its slow descent over the plains, the town looks exactly as it always has, a collection of homes, schools, and parks, nestled in the vast, open expanse of the landscape. But the air feels different, thinner, clearer, scrubbed of the secret that had lingered there for so long. It is the air of a place where the truth has been spoken and where the past is finally allowed to be just that, the past. The mystery has been replaced by the quiet, steady reality of a world that is no longer haunted, but entirely, finally, their own. The case of the missing 19-year-old, the tragedy of the Miller family, the confession of the neighbor, and the long, grueling work of the investigation, it has all coalesced into a single, cohesive narrative of human resilience. The nightmare is over, the truth is established, and the community, resilient, vigilant, and profoundly human, is ready to look toward the next chapter, secure in the knowledge that they are no longer walking in the dark. They are living in the enduring, illuminating light of the reality they built, a reality that is theirs to hold, to protect, and to pass on to the next generation. The investigation was not just the resolution of a single crime, it was the start of a new way of being, a way of living that honors the truth above all else, ensuring that for the people of Oakwood, the future will always be a place where the shadows have nowhere to hide. The local library, a quiet sanctuary on the edge of the town square, has archived the entire Miller file, digitizing every page, photograph, and report for public access. It has become a repository for anyone seeking to understand the nature of the investigation. For students, it is an academic resource. For residents, it is a piece of their heritage. For the curious, it is a reminder of the depth of the town's commitment to the truth. By making these records public, the town has enacted a radical, transparent policy that the history of their trauma belongs to them and that they will never again hide it away in a dusty vault. This transparency is the final, decisive act of defiance against the secrecy that once defined them. It says to the world that Oakwood is no longer afraid of its past because it is no longer ashamed of the truth, regardless of how painful it may be. As the detective walks home from his visit to the garden, the evening light creates long, sharp shadows against the pavement, but they are just shadows, natural and fleeting, not the haunting, distorted shapes he once feared. He reaches his front door, his hand steady as he turns the key, and he pauses for a moment to listen to the sounds of the neighborhood, the distant, muffled laughter of children playing, the hum of a lawnmower in a far-off yard, the gentle sway of the palm fronds in the breeze. It is a symphony of normalcy, a life that has been reclaimed and restored. He enters his home, the air inside cool and still, and he reflects on the arc of his life, a life that was spent in the service of a truth that was often hidden, often difficult, and often heartbreaking, but always, in the end, worth the pursuit. He is a man who has seen the truth finally come to light, and in doing so, he has found his own personal sense of fulfillment. The case of 1994 is a closed file, but the story of Oakwood is a living, continuing reality, one that is informed by the hard-won lessons of their shared past. The town moves forward, not in a straight line, but in the slow, deliberate progression of a community that has learned the value of the long game. They are a resilient people, a people who have proven that the passage of time is not an enemy of justice, but a dimension in which it must be diligently, painstakingly, and courageously pursued. As he rests in his chair, the detective knows that the work of the truth is never